The comic book industry and the toy industry have always been very close allies. Prop replicas, action figures, enough Funko Pops to be considered a crime against both man and God. Superhero toys sell like hotcakes. And in the 80s, this was maybe even more true. A lot of Marvel's weirdest comics from this decade only exist because of licensing agreements. And yeah, I totally get why. If a toy company had a new line that they wanted to get kids invested in, they could just call up Marvel, write up an agreement, and leave the storytelling for their new characters to the professionals. Spacefaring heroes, fantasy warriors, all manner of things imported from Japan. But what about, like, trucks? Like normal trucks, not trucks that are also robots. That has a pretty proven track record. But can you sell toy trucks with a comic book tie-in? If you asked that question to Marvel in the early 1980s, their answer was apparently, sure, why not? And from this out-of-the-box idea, US-1 was born. This comic is a strange one. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anybody that it's a strange one, but it is the specific way in which it gets strange that makes it worth the video. Before we get to the content of the comic itself, let's really quickly go over the agreement that got this book into production. The toys that the US-1 comic promoted were from a line called US-1 Electric Trucking, made by a company named TYCO. The toys were just slot cars, but trucking-themed ones, obviously. The little motorized vehicles would go along a set path, and then they sold lots of accessories which were like loading and unloading stations so that kids could play around with moving cargo from place to place. The reason I have to call attention to this specifically is that slot cars were all that the line was. As I joked about in the intro just a minute ago, there were no characters or storylines associated with these toys, which meant that the Marvel team creating this comic was working like 99% from scratch. The only inspiration they had from the material they were supposed to be advertising was truck, and that's probably why this comic has the plotline that it does. We will begin talking about that plot, as the comic itself does, by introducing our main character. And when I say introducing, I mean that page 1 of issue 1 of US-1 begins with a trucker named Papa Wheelie looking directly at the reader, addressing them, and then starting a fully narrated flashback scene, which is the entirety of this issue. Papa Wheelie gives us the first look at our star, a young man named Ulysses Solomon Archer. Yes, his initials are USA, but people typically just call him US for short. US is a trucker, and he actually comes from a whole line of truckers. Both of US's parents were in this same profession, and he and his brother, Jefferson Hercules Archer, looked up to them from a young age, as we can see in the early pages of this flashback. US wants to follow in his parents' footsteps, a dream that his father encourages, as long as US and Jeff first get a good education and go as far as they can in school. This might sound like a minor detail when I first bring it up. It is not. Some years later, both Archer parents would tragically die in a highway wreck, leaving two family friends, Papa Wheelie and his wife, Wide Load Annie, raising the boys for the few remaining years before adulthood. In adulthood, the boys would go separate ways, but remain connected. Jeff would immediately continue the family business and get a truck of his own. Meanwhile, US was in college, though he was a little bit bitter about this. It's very clear that he also wanted to be a trucker, but felt obligated to stay in school, especially because Jeff was helping to pay his way through it. Despite wanting to get onto a career though, US did very well in college, like comedically well actually. He graduated magna cum laude, he was also the quarterback of the school football team, and apparently graduated with multiple degrees. The exact words as said by Papa Wheelie are, quote, he ended up with degrees in computer program design, electronic engineering, all kinds of things. So at least 2 and probably more. Through all of this, though, US kept up his dream of continuing the family legacy as a trucker, and one day when he was done with school, he went along on a job with his brother. This is where things start to get a bit more comic booky. The two end up driving right near the edge of a cliff during a raging thunderstorm, and as they are doing this probably already not very wise thing, a mysterious all-black truck shows up right next to them and begins trying to run them off the road. US has absolutely no idea what's going on, but Jeff apparently does, referring to this new driver only as the Highwayman, but also not giving any more detail on what exactly he is and, more importantly, what he wants. Regardless of what exactly is happening here, the Highwayman is apparently successful in whatever goal he had, as Jeff's truck does go off the cliff and explode. Jeff is never found. The comic makes a very important note of telling us that no trace of his body was discovered. Meanwhile, US survived, having been thrown clear before the blast, but with severe injuries. US was so badly wounded that the top portion of his skull needed to be replaced entirely, but not by anything normal. That wouldn't be very superhero-y of this book. Instead, it was replaced by an experimental alloy. The sci-fi material within US's head was incredibly durable and afforded him new abilities, like the power to pick up radio signals, and that's it. That's his only power. His skull can pick up nearby radio transmissions, and that is the only supernatural thing that Ulysses Archer can do. Granted, this ability was probably a little bit better back in the 80s before everyone was carrying a superpowered communication device in their pocket at all times, but also US is in or in close proximity to his truck basically at all times, and the truck also has a radio in it. So really, the radio in his head thing is like mild convenience more than anything else. His powers would get upgraded a little bit later in the comic. In these first issues, US could control his truck remotely through a little device that he built inside of a silver dollar, which actually does lead to a pretty good joke in this first issue. Papa Wheelie jokes that the truck is experiencing inflation because it used to be that a vehicle was hot stuff if it could turn on a dime, and now it takes a whole dollar. And you know what? That actually got a chuckle out of me. Good job. Later though, this dollar thing would get abandoned and US would gain the ability to just directly control the truck through his own mind, which is half decent as superpowers go. He can psychically control a semi-truck. This gets even better when you realize exactly how the semi-truck works. Ulysses's rig is called US-1. This is the thing that the book is technically named after. It began as a regular truck, one that Ulysses started driving once his head injury was healed and he began taking jobs again. But then, through the power of his many college degrees, he started upgrading it, and he took that in quite a direction. In addition to just being a normal trucker, US also wanted to hunt down the Highwayman. To this end, he built US-1 with weapons. He gave it an oil slick, and caltrops, and a smoke screen, and miniguns, and tear gas, and frag grenades, and a flamethrower, and anti-air missiles. This thing is a wildly dangerous arsenal. It is insane how many weapons US-1 actually has. How did US pay for all of this on a regular trucker's salary, you might be asking? I have no idea. The only explanation the book ever provides for Ulysses' concerning amount of knowledge on and access to all these deadly weapons is his college degree, which is brought up frequently. Like, so frequently, I feel like there was some sort of editorial mandate that this comic also had to somehow convince kids that college was cool. And while we're talking about the truck and how that works, I might as well just skip forward a couple issues quickly and put this section in right now. US-1 might be alive. I have to say might be because it is strangely unclear. Issue 7 of US-1 is narrated by US-1. Thanks to some technological interference, the truck comes to life or something, and it can drive itself without any sort of outside interference, and it also talks and has enough consciousness to narrate the issue. After issue 7, this is never brought up again, genuinely not a single time. The truck comes to life for one issue, and then that plotline is abandoned entirely. By the way, I feel like I should also clarify, the US-1 toy line that this comic was supposedly about had nothing to do with this whatsoever. Those were not super trucks or sci-fi trucks, they were just normal, regular trucks. The comic was about a guy who could psychically control a heavily armed super weapon. Not in the toys though, none of that. All of this has still been from the first issue, by the way. It's just a bombardment of backstory, though much of the next few issues would actually not be about Ulysses hunting the Highwayman, as much as it was the Highwayman coming to him, usually by employing some other supervillains. And in this case, I do mean supervillains. While US is more of a normal, everyday guy who also has some super tech, the rogues gallery that he faces are absolutely costumed supervillains. The most common recurring member of the Highwayman's evil gang is a woman simply known as Midnight. Midnight is kind of like the evil love interest trope for US. Her main weapon is a whip, and also, if she gets you with this whip, then she hypnotizes you and can control your mind. This was in a comic for kids meant to sell toys. Just want to point that out again. She has a mind control whip, but whatever. US is pretty consistently able to foil her plans due to the fact that he is resistant to her mind control because he has a metal plate in his skull. Yeah, it might not be like a super sci-fi metal plate, but his head still is made of metal, he's resistant to mind control, and he does headbutt people with it a lot. Despite the fact that she wears like the tiniest mask known to man, the real identity of Midnight is also a recurring question throughout a lot of the series. They set up pretty early that she seems to be somebody from Ulysses' regular civilian life, probably one of his two love interest characters on that side of his persona. The first option is another trucker named Taryn O'Connell, and the other is Mary McGrill, whom the comic describes as, quote, the sweetest little waitress who ever had her bottom pinched by a trucker. Yikes. These two fight for US's affections constantly, it's like their only personality traits, and in a twist that's probably pretty predictable, rather than being the more tomboyish, bold Taryn, Midnight's real identity is the sweet, unassuming Mary McGrill. However, instead of actually using this as a point to give her more of a personality, turns out she was just also being mind controlled by the Highwayman through use of her own hypno whip. So she really is just this stock sweet waitress character. Moving on in US's rogues gallery, though not moving in a better direction, we have another recurring villain, Baron von Blimp, a very overblown, comedically bumbling German caricature who believes that air transport is far superior to ground transport and thus hates Ulysses Archer for being such a good trucker. Wow, the villains in this are not very good. Making this character even more, I don't even really have a word for it, in Baron von Blimp's first appearance, his minions just kind of have generic featureless uniforms, but when he appears again later in the comic, they are wearing swastikas, like straight up openly on the page. Those were not there in his first appearance. I don't know why they started showing up later, and it is kind of odd. This isn't even the end of it, as when he is questioned about his uniform choice for his minions, Baron von Blimp admits that he's not actually German, but just thought that they had the best looking uniforms. What? I don't... Look, there's a chance that this is a commentary on how neo-Nazis are dumb and awful, and if that's the case, good, because neo-Nazis are dumb and awful. But I really can't tell if that was the goal, so I'm just gonna move on. I am just gonna take this opportunity to say this again, though. This was a comic licensed to sell toy trucks. Oh, wow. Moving on very fast, there is one other antagonist I need to cover before I get to the Highwayman himself. I say antagonist, not villain, very intentionally here, because this guy isn't technically evil, but in issue 5 of US 1, Ulysses encounters an alien. This alien seems like a bad guy at first, as he distorts the landscape into a strange maze that US has to navigate, but upon getting to the center, he learns that the maze was just a test, apparently so that the alien could make sure that, like, the military or any people who would be liable to shoot him immediately didn't make it there first. In a very fun little bit of world building, actually, the alien is able to communicate with US in English. However, he has the dialect and cadence of a stereotypical Southern trucker because he learned English by listening to trucker broadband radio, and I actually like that detail a lot. At the end of issue 5, the alien, who is still unnamed and undetailed, simply flies away, so he seems like a one-off thing. Seems is the key word. Anyway, Highwayman time. The Highwayman is a looming presence throughout all of US 1, but we don't get any definitive information on him until a couple issues in. In issue 3, we get a whole complicated backstory about him, saying that he is a magically empowered monster who sold his soul and now travels the road at night, hunting for other souls that he can send to his demonic master. Weirdly, this is the first thing that ties US 1 into the larger Marvel universe, as apparently in his quest for magical power, the Highwayman visited the Ancient One and was turned away. However, this might just be an Easter egg because this entire story was a lie. It was being told to Ulysses by an old man, and that old man is shortly revealed to be the Highwayman himself, just kind of spewing a fake story in order to get Ulysses more scared. Still, US 1 is in the Marvel universe. We will get to that later. Despite this specific story not being true, the Highwayman's abilities do seem magical at first, but over the course of the comic, they would be revealed as more technological in nature. His truck, which was called Black Rig, seemed to run on similar technology to what Ulysses himself was using. Actually, true details about the Highwayman would not start being revealed until the final issues of the comic. In the first part, he was mostly just orchestrating his henchmen or being seen through flashbacks to the original night when the truck drove off the cliff. There are a good number of these flashbacks. They retell US 1's origin plenty of times, and every time they do it, they call very, very specific attention to the fact that Jeff's body was never recovered. The comic really wants to make sure you remember that specific detail, and bring it up as often as they have the opportunity. The Highwayman was Jeff, of course. Look, you're not reading the comic right now, you're getting the very abbreviated, summarized YouTube version, but trust me when I say, it would be easier to miss the actual real US 1 truck barreling directly towards you than it would be to miss this little twist. But the question then remains, why? Why did Jeff become the Highwayman? And there are two reasons behind it. The first is the more normal one. Apparently, Jeff was always bitter at Ulysses for being better than him at everything, which I kind of understand in context. Ulysses Solomon Archer is a technological super genius, and he has multiple college degrees that he got with honors while also being the star quarterback of the football team, and he's apparently rich enough to buy a cool truck that he invented himself full of all kinds of crazy super weapons, and he has 2 love interests constantly fighting over him, 3 if you count the villainous Midnight identity, and he's incredibly ripped and he has no character flaws. No one ever paid attention to Jeff because they were too busy fawning over Ulysses all the time. That is stated directly within the book. And also, let me remind everybody that Jeff canonically helped pay for Ulysses' college. Like, Ulysses got a partial scholarship, apparently, but Jeff got the trucking job to pay for the rest of it, and then didn't have enough money to go to college himself. He sacrificed everything for Ulysses, and then Ulysses is just awful. So I don't think we can blame Jeff for being kinda bitter here. Bitter enough to try and kill his brother? No, that might be a little bit excessive, but in fairness, killing Ulysses was never actually his goal. According to Jeff himself, his plan by crashing the original truck was just to fake his own death so that he didn't have to be around Ulysses anymore. The truck crashed harder than he expected, which is why Ulysses also got injured. And yeah, that's probably Jeff's fault for trying to fake his own death with his brother in the truck, but whatever. If this was the Highwayman's only villainous motivation, that would be normal by comic book standards, right? He hated his brother and later became a supervillain in order to ruin his life. Par for the course. But like I just said, there was another reason Jeff was doing all this, and that, of course, had to deal with the alien invasion force that was hovering just above the planet's surface. Oh, did I forget to mention that? That was also a thing that's happening. Yeah, the one-off US Archer meets an alien comic was not a one-off, apparently, and a few issues later, they reveal that that alien's entire army was just sitting away from Earth for an unknown purpose. They were the ones who gave Jeff his advanced technology. He was piloting the highly weaponized Black Rig with a similar remote to what US originally used, and he got that from the aliens. The reason why this insane thing is happening is also not explained immediately. The book first just tells us that the Highwayman is working with these mysterious aliens, and as time is running out for whatever his charge is, he challenges Ulysses to a straight-up death race, and then they do that, which US of course wins. At the end of all this, the Highwayman is on such a rampage that he's about to try and kill US with his bare hands, but as this is going on, the aliens finally arrive in person, stop the Highwayman from doing that, and tell everyone that this whole thing has been a big misunderstanding. The aliens reveal that they were sent to Earth not to invade or conquer or anything like that, and rather they represented a coalition of populated planets which were now looking for a representative from Earth as humanity began taking to the stars. They needed somebody honest and noble and brave of heart, and so they picked Ulysses Archer, because as I said a few minutes ago, the man has no character flaws. But if they chose US, then why does Jeff have all the tech as the Highwayman? They got the wrong brother. The aliens just thought that humans all looked alike, and so they messed up and didn't do their research and accidentally grabbed Jeff instead of Ulysses. And Jeff, being bitter at his brother for his entire life, basically said, hey, this is the first time a good thing has ever happened to me, so let me prove myself as better for this role than my brother, so that I can take to the stars instead. And that's why he became the Highwayman. As has happened so many times, this opens up another question. Why was the Highwayman trying to kill Ulysses if he was just trying to prove that he was better to represent Earth? Well, Jeff knew that Ulysses was better than him, and so he was trying to just take US off the board before the aliens realized that fact. The panel in which US learns the truth of what's been going on is hilarious, mostly just because of Jeff's reaction to all this. There's a really dramatic shot in which the alien points at Ulysses and says, "And we chose you, US Archer." And US goes, "Me?" And then Jeff just goes, "Ah, nuts." It's such a weird, not climactic conclusion to all this, but I guess it's kind of on tone. All of this is happening in issue 11 of US 1, and the next one, issue 12, would be the final of the series. With the Highwayman's identity revealed, the aliens challenge both him and US to a more formal sort of death race, this one taking place in space, which will definitively prove which one of them is better to go out and inherit the stars. The aliens' own words, not mine. Much of this comic is a grand sequence of these two highly weaponized semi-trucks careening around the Earth and weaving between alien spaceships and crashing into each other, culminating in Jeff making a bad call and slamming Black Rig into the moon. He is extracted before the explosion, surviving thanks to the aliens, but since his vehicle is destroyed, US wins and is chosen as the aliens' perfect ambassador. At this point, I want to remind everybody again that the toys this comic was made to promote were little normal trucks that went around a preset track and delivered imaginary cargo. When I said that the Marvel team just kind of made up 99% of this completely from scratch, that was a promise that I was not exaggerating about. Now, with the Highwayman plotline both revealed and resolved, the only question left is what happens to US-1? He has been chosen by the aliens, so where does his fate lie? Well, it turns out that the grand cosmic role the aliens had chosen Ulysses Solomon Archer for was to be a trucker, but in space this time. Yeah, as much as they set this up as a grand cosmic role, it wasn't one. The aliens were looking for truckers from Earth who they could use for interplanetary trade routes. I promise it is nothing more dramatic than that. They wanted Ulysses because he was a trucker, not because of his fancy college degree or his skill with intergalactic weaponry. No, he was a good, intelligent, and strong-willed trucker. And so now he's gonna go do that in space. The last panel of the original US-1 series shows Ulysses driving US-1 through the cosmos. Oh, and also his adopted parents are there in their truck stop because their truck stop is going to space now too. A very common setting for this book is a truck stop owned by Papa Wheelie and Wide Load, which is also the place that Midnight is secretly a waitress at. This truck stop is called the Short Stop, and it is the subject of a B-plot that runs throughout the entire comic, where the parents don't have enough money to pay the rent for it, and so a bunch of corrupt lawyers are trying to get it out from under them. I didn't mention this earlier in the video because it really is an independent thing. It never weaves into the main storyline until right at the end, but at the end, rather than giving it up to the lawyers, the aliens just tell Ulysses that he can bring his family and their truck stop along, and so the short stop becomes the star stop, and it is also in space now. While this is the end of the original US-1 series, there is more for me to cover in this video. US-1 has some history remaining, but before we get to the rest of it, there is one thing I should address. Did this comic work? Like, did it work for its original intent? As I have mentioned several times, the US-1 comic book series was made to promote a series of what turned out to be largely unrelated toys, but the comic was interesting enough and it did go to the completion of its 12-issue run, so was it good at its job of promoting the toys? Now, I don't have the sales statistics of a toy line from the early 80s in front of me, but what I can tell you is that the last issue of US-1 came out in 1984. And the US-1 toy line was shut down in 1985, so I don't think it was a fantastic deal. It is impossible for me to say exactly why the US-1 comics did not turn out to be a major success, but also I feel decently confident attributing it at least in part to the total disconnect between the comics and the toys. After all, these two products had the exact same logo on them. And speaking for myself, if I was a kid and read this comic where the trucks have guns and missiles and are driving through space, and then I went and I looked at the toys, which were this, I would be more than a little disappointed. However, the fact that US-1 was kind of just its own thing did work in Marvel's favor in that they got to continue using Ulysses Archer as a character. The way these licensing agreements worked in the 80s meant that Marvel got to keep rights to anything that they created on their own. This would often lead to weird side characters from licensed books making their way into other Marvel properties, while the main characters would go back to whatever company owned them. But in US-1's case, Marvel did make up the main character entirely, so he got to stick around. Hilariously, almost all of the main cast of US-1 would later appear in other Marvel books, except for the truck. Technically, the truck did appear again in space, continuing where US-1 the series left off, but in this book, it had been upgraded, meaning that it now looked like this and was referred to not as US-1, but as Star Rig. I cannot confirm or deny exactly what happened here, but I would guess that this change had to be made because US-1 was still ostensibly the toy owned by TYCO, and so while Marvel could use all of their characters, they couldn't have their characters driving the toy that the comic was actually about. So then what comic actually cared enough about US Archer and his buddies to bring them back? Surely it was just as a cameo or a reference or an Easter egg, right? And no, in his next appearance, US Archer is actually plot relevant. This would come 5 years after the original US-1 series in the pages of Sensational She-Hulk issue 6. Though technically, US Archer himself is not in this issue, he's in the next one, but issue 6 just has his side characters. This series was a comedy book, and a very self-aware one at that, but even by the standards of Sensational She-Hulk, the plot of this issue is incredibly random. Jen Walters is at Cape Canaveral as a celebrity guest for an unmanned NASA rocket test, and as the rocket is taking off, it gets hijacked by Taryn O'Connell, one of US Archer's 2 love interests. There is then a tight little 2-page sequence in which Taryn explains the entire plot of US-1 as fast as she possibly can, confirming some information that was left vague at the end in the process. Apparently, when the short stop went to space, Mary McGrill went with it, and Taryn years later regretted that she also did not follow her friends into space. So that's what she's trying to do now. She made various attempts to get into space legitimately, all of which failed, and Taryn eventually became so desperate that she teamed up with another superhero named Razorback, who was also a trucker as his day job, and then they did this whole ship hijacking thing just so that they could go and figure out what exactly happened to Ulysses. She-Hulk just kinda goes along with this for a bit. The crew visits the Star Stop, which has now ballooned into an entire space station, and here they meet Papa Wheelie and Wideload again, also learning in the process that US and Mary McGrill are married now, and Mary is pregnant with their first kid. Ulysses himself is out on a job at the time, but right after everybody meets, Star Rig, in its new spaceship upgraded form, crashes right into the Star Stop, and Zemnu crawls out of the wreckage. For anyone who doesn't know who Zemnu is, he is a horribly very trustworthy. Nah, I'm not gonna do this bit again. If you want to know what that's all about and what Zemnu's entire deal is, check the video I made right before this one. But for this video's purposes, he is a mind-controlling alien whose usual plot is trying to repopulate his deserted homeworld in one way or another. The newest target of Zemnu's plotting was apparently Ulysses' unborn baby, so he had hijacked Star Rig, kidnapped Ulysses, and also Retread. I'm genuinely realizing right now that I have not mentioned Retread at all in this video up to this point, so let me do that really quickly. In the original US-1 series, there was another recurring character named Retread, who is Ulysses' lazy but well-meaning best friend. He would frequently go along with US Archer on his jobs, and his only role within the story is being a body for Ulysses to talk to. That is truly, legitimately it. I did not have to mention him in the part about the original series because he never affects the original series. But if you've been wondering who this guy that sometimes shows up in panels is, it's Retread. Anyway, Zemnu subdues the heroes with mind control, somehow penetrating Ulysses' metal skull psychic resistance in the process. This is never explained, even though it's one of like 2 things that Ulysses can actually do. Then Zemnu straps Mary to a machine and begins the process of converting her baby. Before the child can be transformed into a Zemnu creature, She-Hulk breaks free, fights Zemnu, defeats him, and then goes back to Earth, with Terran and Razorback remaining in the Star Stop as they originally intended. And that is the end of this first US Archer arc. It is a very quick 2-issue thing in the pages of She-Hulk, but then he would come back later in the same book for a more extended run. Rather than having Jen look for US, in issue 40 of Sensational She-Hulk, US looked for Jen. Apparently, a bunch of living meteors were terrorizing the region of space around the Star Stop, and remembering her from their previous encounter, US wanted to ask if she could assist. She-Hulk stayed in space a little longer this time around, getting an entire cosmic arc where she fought Zemnu again and dealt with the Skrulls and had a body swap storyline going on. There was a lot of things happening, and US was there for all of it, along with the alien who recruited him to be a space trucker in the first place. Still technically unnamed, but just going by Al, which is presumably short for alien. Here's the funny thing about these comics though, despite being a main member of She-Hulk's little space team for 9 consecutive issues, US keeps very tightly towards his original concept, by which I mean, he is a trucker and very little else. This is, after all, the She-Hulk Goes to Space arc, and to do that, she's going to need a spaceship. That spaceship is Star Rig, and US Archer is the guy that drives Star Rig. Don't get me wrong, he does get a couple of very cool driving the space truck moments, but that is the only thing that he does. US's time in She-Hulk ends with him simply going back to his regular status quo as a space trucker, and this is his last major appearance. But there are a few minor appearances of US, none of which can really agree on what he's been doing since. Granted, he is one of the main characters of his next appearance. This would be in 2011 in one issue of Deadpool Team Up. And I mean, Deadpool Team Up was a very not serious comic, and the whole gimmick was just that Deadpool was teaming up with this trucker guy, so it went kind of how you'd expect. They present him far less as a golden boy and more as a washed-up trucker back on Earth for unknown reasons. They say he's been stranded there while his family is still out in space, but never go exactly into why. He is also no longer called US-1, he is referred to as US Ace, presumably also because of licensing agreements with TYCO, which at this point was owned by Mattel. The villain of this comic also calls back to US 1 though, because it's the Highwayman. Jeff is back for this, and amazingly, it would not be his first reappearance since those original comics. The Highwayman was a one-off Ghost Rider villain in 2009, where they upgrade him with demonic powers and give him a new living version of Black Rig. Highwayman was just a gimmick villain of the week here. They didn't use him in any vital way, but funny enough, he would briefly be a recurring character for Deadpool, as apparently Jeff had made some sort of deal with underworld leaders about ferrying souls back and forth between realms. It was not a huge thing, but it did happen for a couple of issues. As for Ulysses, though, his next appearance would be a single-panel joke cameo in The New Avengers, as he was apparently one of the candidates trying to babysit Luke Cage and Jessica Jones's baby. He didn't get the job, but the panel does show him back to his original appearance, and also, unfortunately, say that apparently the superhero trucker job did not work out for him, so he's still washed up for one issue. Then his most recent appearance would be very shortly after that as a one-page cameo in Annihilators, where he is back in space and apparently has his trucking business active again, as he is taking a job ferrying Rocket Raccoon to a planet that he is trying to reach as part of the Guardians of the Galaxy arc that was going on. So he got stranded on Earth and was looking for work and then got back to space. All of these really brief cameos and the Deadpool thing happened in the span of like 1 year, so somebody at Marvel just really wanted to make US Archer jokes during that brief time, and then he has not been seen since. I don't know what the deal is with that. And with that, I have covered every appearance of Ulysses Solomon Archer. He's not an incredibly major character, he's only been in 26 comics during his entire history, and in this one video, I have touched on all of them. Now we get to the final recap, thoughts, and opinions section. This is going to be fun. Starting off with an easy question. Do I like the US 1 comic? No! I have read worse comics, sure, but I've read a lot of comics, so that is not a particularly high bar. US 1 is an entertaining read, though maybe not for the reasons it was trying to be. For one, US Archer himself is a horrible character. I made a joke about this earlier in the video, but he is God's perfect trucker boy. He is good at everything, he has no character flaws, and everyone thinks he's amazing. Like, seriously, even the comic's villains only hate US because they acknowledge how amazing he is and are jealous of him. Speaking of those other characters, the vast majority of them have one role, which is just hyping up US the entire time. His parents talk about how amazing he is. His friends only exist to have conversations with him. He has multiple love interests. Hell, the plot of the comic is aliens coming to Earth because they heard about how amazing US Archer is. Now, at the end of my videos, I always try to take some level of positive spin, right? I don't like being really negative on this channel. And contrary to what I just said, it actually is pretty easy for me to say something that I do genuinely like about US 1. There is an aspect of this comic that I love, and it's the Highwayman. I promise I'm not doing a bit here. I unironically think that the Highwayman is a wild diamond in the rough of this very, very weird series. Let's compare him to the real protagonist, right? Ulysses Archer's story arc starts at being a cool trucker and ends at being a cool trucker, but in space this time. Jeff Archer, on the other hand, is a man who had to take on the caretaker role for his brother at a young age after the untimely death of their parents. He got a career sacrificing his own dreams of going to school in the process so that he could pay for Ulysses' schooling, and when Ulysses got there, he succeeded at everything with basically no effort, while complaining the whole time and just wishing that he could be a trucker, which was the job that Jeff was doing despite not really wanting to. Jeff, who felt unappreciated for the genuine sacrifices he was making, had to just watch as everyone fawned over his golden boy younger brother, growing bitter about it over years in the process. Then, when aliens come to Earth and ascend him to the stars, he realizes that this only happened because they thought he was Ulysses. The wildness of the situation eats away at Jeff, who eventually becomes paranoid that the aliens are going to correct their mistake. This drives him so insane that he goes on a whole Scooby-Doo villain arc, ultimately trying to kill his brother before the aliens process what happened and take away the one chance at greatness that Jeff ever had in his life. And just to be super clear on this, because I don't expect people to keep pausing the video and reading all the text that I'm putting on the screen from the comic panels, none of this is just implied or my own interpretation of events. All of this is explicitly stated in the US1 series. That sounds like, I'm not going to beat around the bush here, that sounds like an actual character. The Highwayman has positive and negative qualities, he has believable villain motivation. I will go so far to say that he is a sympathetic character, at least slightly. The whole constantly living in his brother's shadow thing is compelling. We never really get to see this go anywhere, of course, because God's favorite trucker has to go to space. And while Highwayman has appeared in future comics, the reputation of the US1 series has sort of ruined him, I think. He is most often a Deadpool character, which means that he is usually just used as a comedic bit. I am being dead serious when I say that I want to read more Highwayman comics. I actually think he has the potential to be a really interesting villain. Not US, get him out of here, but come on Marvel, it's time to give the underappreciated brother his due. Do I think that's actually going to happen anytime soon? I have no idea. Maybe, fingers crossed, once I've written a little bit more, I can get into Marvel and then I'll finally give Jeff what he deserves. But for now, it seems like the space trucking, villain battling, alien encountering Archer brothers will remain nothing but a footnote in Marvel history, which, I will remind everyone one final time, was originally designed to sell toy trucks. Thank you all for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed. No huge announcements today. The next video I'm doing will have some fun new stuff in it, but that video is also very long, so it's going to be a bit before it comes out. Do keep your eyes open though. Regular stuff is still happening though. I do have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my content, as well as a new exclusive video every month, along with an hours-long backlog of all the previous exclusives. My username there is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to that below this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find. And also, as always, big thank you to the people who already support me over there. It does really help me out in continuing to make these videos for you guys. Final shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He drew the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you for the last 40-ish minutes or so. Go check out his other work if you have a chance. And now I will leave you with one final US1 fact that I left to the last line of the video because that was the funniest way that I could possibly do it. Remember that weird line where the comic called Mary McGrill the sweetest little waitress to ever have her bottom pinched by a trucker? Guess who said that line? Did you guess the truck from the one issue that the truck narrates? Yeah, the truck said that. US1 the truck is sexist. God, what a weird comic.